everybody, and welcome to the Bodacity Show. I'm Jeanette Anderson, and I'm here today with Dr. Alex Swenson-Ridley. Ridley or Ridley?
Ridley.
Ridley, who is a fascinating woman that I just met, actually, and is really passionate about supporting women in transforming their health, their well-being, and how they're being in the world. And so I wanted to bring her on because we want to talk about all things hormones. Oh, stop dinging at me. All things hormones and so forth, so that we can support you. So let me tell you some practical stuff about her, and then we'll get into the juicy tidbits and all things hormonal. So welcome. I'm glad you're here, Alex.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And tell people where you are, where you're calling in from.
At the moment, I'm in San Diego. We have a house down here, but we actually live in Alaska, which is why I'm in San Diego, because it's winter right now.
See, now that's a really smart combo. All right. So Dr. Alex helps smart women transform their hormones so that they can show up as their best selves for the people they love and the things they're passionate about. She's an overly educated chiropractor turned coach and integrative medicine Ph.D. candidate who transitioned from owning a 7-figure chiropractic office that was not her dream to truly working in her zone of genius as a hormone transformation coach to other high-achieving women. Her motto, it's not the hormones, it's the environment, and that means healing our inner world first. Love that. Love that approach and that that overly educated chiropractor. And congrats on the accomplishment of building a 7-figure business, because that's not an easy task. And congrats on walking away from a 7-figure business.
Yeah.
That's an even more challenging task to step into your passion. So let's talk about that passion. Tell me what your why is.
I know we were talking about why when we met. I really found this place where when I was working as a chiropractor, I was a pediatric and perinatal chiropractor, and I just kept seeing woman after woman and, grandma, mom, everyone coming in just exhausted and not any semblance of who I knew they really were underneath, and, not having any tools or resources or capacity to even start doing anything differently. And I also found myself in that place. I mean, a lot of my journey has to do with what happened with my health and my experience, but I really reached a point where I'm just fed up with women accepting that that's all life can be or should be. And, we live in this interesting world where we're bridging like the past of being stay-at-home mom and like the traditional patriarchal, female role, and really stepping out into our own power, because we all have that. And I truly believe it's possible to bridge both worlds. And I think I'm doing that. I homeschool my 9.5-year-old son, and I have 3 stepsons and all that, and still run my business, and am overly educated and have all of those things where it's like, we stepped into that world, but it takes something to find the balance. And I found that women really need a space to have that conversation and direction and like permission to do something differently.
Exactly. Well, so I kind of missed a little step there in terms of asking you to tell us something that we wouldn't guess about you, because I do want to come back to the whole overachieving. Sorry, the cat is head bunting my computer. So, tell us something that we wouldn't guess about you, because, I think probably people have this, wow, holy cow, she's Superwoman. And you are, but tell us something that might surprise people about you.
I'm actually, well, we can do, I don't know how interesting this is. I'm a complete introvert. And it's been interesting to get into the, online space of putting myself out there, because I would rather like sit on my couch and read and curl up with a good blanket and a book and not talk to anybody ever. Yeah. And I love, I love the people I meet, like you and other women that I've just been able to meet, and getting my message out there. I also play the violin. That's a little
Very
side note.
cool. That's, I wouldn't have guessed that. The introvert part, yes, but yeah, it is very interesting. How do you be in the world authentically as a business person and put yourself out there as an introvert? Because it's not about you got to suddenly become an extrovert and be blah blah, but how can you still be seen and heard amongst the noise without having to shout, right? Like, and that's a
Yeah.
very interesting challenge for people to find their way of being seen and heard. And so tell me a little bit about what specifically got you interested in hormones as a path, because from chiropractic to that doesn't seem like an intuitive leap for many people.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, chiropractic education is grossly misunderstood, I think, in the world, largely due to the chiropractic profession, but hormones was not a huge part of what we learned. And, you know, it really started with my own journey. I reached a point kind of when I think I told you this story. I had my business had grown and by leaps and bounds every year for 5 years. And I reached the big pinnacle point of I bought a 6,000 square foot building and remodeled it, and it was beautiful. And I had the team and had all the stuff. And I walked up to my office and sat down and cried because it wasn't my dream. My health was falling apart. I was losing my hair. I was losing my voice. My weight was starting to creep up at that point. I was freaking exhausted all of the time. It was all I could do to maybe make my son dinner when we got home. I was a single mom at the time as well. And I knew something needed to change. And I am not someone, if the chiropractic profession and going that route taught me anything, it's I'm not conventional. And I was not willing to just take a pill to mask the symptoms. Like that was not an option for me. And so that really led me on a journey to trying to like, what do you do and how do you figure it out? Because hormones also are not really talked about much in our world, even at the stages of menopause or, postpartum. It's like Western medicine is not the place to go for that. There's not a lot of tools in the toolbox to really help. So it led me on a journey to really learning a lot on my own. I did a, integrative medicine coaching certification, which helped start get my feet wet, but then it was, trial error, exploring, learning, putting a lot of pieces together, watching my clients go through journeys as I started working with them on healing a lot of stuff, and finally getting to a point where I figured it out on some level. I feel like I'm still learning. There's always another layer to peel back and another thing to learn, but it's, it came together as stopping to look outside of myself for all the answers and instead do the inner work first is what finally made the big difference. So
Right. Well, and so let's talk a little bit about that in terms of what does that mean? Because a lot of high achieving women,
mm-hmm.
so there's going to be people on here who are either that and would raise their hand and say, yeah, that's me and I get it and I'm pooped.
Yeah.
Or there's going to be women who say like, oh my God, I'm such a slug and underachiever and I can't relate, and everything kind of in between.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that exhaustion that women have in general. Like I think there's a zeitgeist of us being tired at a kind of a
Yeah.
soul spiritual level, of tired of a patriarchal system that doesn't honor women and so forth on so many different levels. And then
Mm-hmm.
just tired because we're trying to be all things to all people, and tired because we're trying to figure out how to be in our power and still be in our whatever femininity is, etc. And then we're just practically tired because we work hard and
Yeah.
do um what does the work that you do, how does it kind of address those different levels?
Yeah. Well, I love that you bring that up. So I borrowed/took over a term that showed up one time in literature in like 1986. And that is selfless syndrome. And I'm currently writing the book. It's going to come out in early January, so it might be out by the time this airs. But on selfless syndrome and what it is. And what I really argue is it's the root cause of exhaustion, anxiety, and hormonal chaos. And I use the term high achieving women because even those that, maybe you feel like you aren't doing enough, or like if there's that concept of like enough or you feel lazy, a lot of that is probably in your head. Let's just be honest. Like we all have some level of drive and where we're like not acknowledging how much we actually do in the world. And what selfless syndrome is what I argue it's a maladaptation of a stress response. And so as like a species and as our hardwiring, we are hardwired to check on everybody. Like if you think about a mama, for example, my mom came across two cubs and went up to check on them, and Mama Bear was definitely around. And so Mama Bear's like, the only reason my mom got away is because Mama checked on the cubs before she came after my mom. It's very driven. And as humans, we do the same thing. We want to tend everybody around us. But then in order to de-stress, we are supposed to befriend, is what this is called for women. It's tend and befriend. And most of us are missing that. We're missing that connection. We don't have the time. We don't, make the time. And so as a result, we're just constantly giving and we never receive in return. And it leads to different layers of exhaustion, like the kind of just surface level tiredness is that first one. Then we hit overwhelm. And then eventually we hit resignation, where it's just like we are resigned to the world ever changing and not who we truly are. And at that point, we're having health issues, our, like, in the US in particular, menopause, perimenopause, we have more symptoms, more trouble, more like all the things. And I would say, I know you're in Canada, so like I would just couch that as North America. We tend to run hand in hand, but it's, it's true. I've talked with women all over the world now, where there's things that like didn't used to be there. Same with, PMS, and there's issues with cycles, postpartum stuff. Like we've normalized so much of it, but it's not actually normal. And I really argue that at the root of it is we're missing something in the world. And a lot of it's connection to both ourselves and others. So
that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, we're kind of steeped in I'm going to call it a patriarchal medical model. And I don't mean just men, but it's very male dominated. And therefore it doesn't have that understanding of cycles and flow and how to deal with women. Like we get less money on research, doctors understand it less, etc. Even female doctors, because they're just not trained. So exhaustion, overwhelm, and resignation. I think a lot of people would identify, especially perhaps with the first two, but may not know what the third one looks like, because I think a lot of women in that, and that's where, like you said, the health stuff comes up. How do we know when we're in that stage?
So the way I look at this, and kind of all this stuff came together as I started writing my book, and I was like, oh, the angels are singing. It all makes sense. Yep. I think of resignation as the state of numbness, honestly. Like and if you look at traditional, like how they talk about stress and our stress response, there's a lot of research out about it, but we have the fight or flight. There's actually appease is the first one. And so that's where the selfless syndrome comes in. Like it's actually a stress response to take care of people and try to please everybody. And we don't recognize that. So that's like the very top. And then we hit the tend and befriend / fight or flight. Like that's kind of what's going on there. And then underneath that, if we stay in a heightened state of stress for long enough, we actually go numb or hit a freeze state. Freeze is the other stress response. And so resignation, in my, how I explain it and how I look at it, is that point. It's where you've literally gone numb to the world around you. And I was surprised at one point I had a quiz out there. I've created or come up with, there's like 5 archetypes to selfless syndrome. And I was surprised the most common one was the resigned woman, the one who has given up on anything ever changing or being any different.
Which is something I see a lot, and in that space, when you ask them, well, what do you want, or what do you want to create, or who do you want to be, or what do you need, all of those questions just
I have no idea.
I have no idea. So then how do we come back from that? So what are some of the physical things we can do first, or do we start with the inner game? So how do we reverse that resignation?
Honestly, it is a highly individualized experience, is what I've learned. And I tend to approach things from both directions. So, can we do like a deep detox and work on your gut health and stuff? Yes. And that tends to start to, open up other things. Like, for example, I had a client, I do some work with parasites and, really cleaning the gut out of stuff. And she was really into it. So she measured what came out of her, and it was like 9.5 feet of biofilm. Like she had alcohol and, plastic and gloves and all this stuff. She was really, really into it. And she came out of that, and we had a meeting, and she just looked at me. She's like, yeah, so I have trauma from 40 years ago. I've never talked to anybody about, and I'm ready to do that. And I was like, okay. So that opened the door for some more inner exploration. Others, we have to go the other way. Like I think for me, it's been about that inner work first. And the big piece of it is to ask yourself, I had a coach ask me this earlier this year. We were talking about something and she's like, so where do you feel that in your body? And I was like, what are you talking about? Because if you are living in this world of selfless syndrome, of stress, of, resignation, even, we're completely disconnected. Like if you're in your head at all, there's nothing below the neck. And I have clients, and I'm still working through this myself. And so it's starting to connect with feelings, which can be really, difficult for a lot of us. But asking where you feel that, or checking in with different areas of your body. Like I do a lot of work with energy centers and having women like with the idea of sensation, not necessarily having to intellectually figure it out, but like what sensations do you feel at your head and your, crown and your throat, your heart, and figuring out where you're numb and where you are connected. And then
brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that because it's very visceral, right? And it's very foundational and fundamental. And we are very disconnected. And I know I spent a lot of my life living from the neck up, still at sometimes am, and work a lot with a lot of women who are what I call living from the neck up. Not present to feelings, not present to our body, not present to our sensuality or sexuality, not present to a lot of things. So where do hormones come into this? How do they play a part? And how do we know if we have a hormonal issue?
So if you have any kind of symptoms, and this is whether I'm younger, I have not hit perimenopause yet, but a lot of the women that I work with are in that perimenopause, menopause stage. So, like your body's acting differently. It's like suddenly your pants don't fit. That's actually was my experience. I woke up one morning and literally not a single pair of pants that I'd worn the week before could I button. And I was like, what? And I now looking back on it, recognize that was like a decade of being in that state of selfless syndrome, hormonal chaos, all of that stuff, where finally my outer world was, our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And so, we have to recognize that. So you're exhausted. And again, we've normalized a lot of this stuff. Your periods are inconsistent if you're still cycling, or, you have really awful experiences. I'm the woman who can say like, hey, your cycle can be normal. Like, I don't even know mine's coming half the time. If I wasn't tracking it, it would surprise me literally every month. Whereas I used to be well aware when that was coming on. And it's really like the biggest thing I hear from women is I want to feel like myself again. And I have other coaches be like, well, that's really unspecific. What does that mean? I think we all know what that means. We feel like we're not ourselves. And so that's your biggest clue.
So how do people find out if they have a hormonal imbalance?
So I use a lot of symptoms with it. I have also done lab testing in the past. I'm in this weird transitionary place where I'm actually letting go of my chiropractic license because lab testing was the only thing I was doing with it. And not to say that it's not valuable and important. However, the way they test in the Western medical world tells you nothing because they don't pay attention to where you are in your cycle. The ranges are huge. They don't make any sense. They're going to tell you you're fine when you're not. Like there's nothing helpful there. And they tend to prescribe either birth control or hormone replacement therapy either without looking at it and then they jack you up more, or if they do look at it, they're not really understanding it. So my favorite, like if you were to get tested, the Dutch test is kind of the gold standard of looking at it because they have a testing window and they really look at, how your body's actually metabolizing hormones and how they're showing up in the whole pathway. But essentially, like we have hormones that exist in any of our energy centers. That's the big connection with that.
And so, that's interesting. Hormones in our energy centers. Different hormones. I haven't heard of that before. So that's a very cool.
Yeah, different centers have different hormonal pathways tied to them.
Did not know that. Okay, there's so many fascinating things that I want to talk to you about, and I do apologize that we are a little shorter today because I got started a little later. So I would love to have you come back on and do another more kind of in-depth dive on some of these things. But let's tell people where they can find out more about you and the work you do. So first, what's your website? Tell us your website.
Yeah. Emergentwomencoaching.com is my website.
The spell
Um,
emergent.
EMERGENT and then women coaching. I think we could.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, .com. And then you've got something they can go and download, right? So tell us about that.
Yeah. So well, there's two ways to connect. We'll put it that way. I just have recently launched a newsletter called the Selfies Chronicle. And what this is it's a movement of women who are committed to really living out and embodying the idea that self-care isn't selfless or selfish, I should say. Self-care isn't selfish. And so, that gets into a lot of the things that we talked about, because that ideology is part of what keeps us stuck in hormonal hell. So that's one thing. And then I also actually host a podcast called the Selfless Syndrome Show, where I talk about a lot of this as well.
So just before we wrap up, define the selfless syndrome.
So I define it as that innate desire we have to take care of everyone and everything else except ourselves. And as we talked about, it's, it seems like it should be a good thing. And I get that, isn't it good to be selfless? And yes. However, when you never have a de-escalation opportunity or an ability to refill your cup, and you're not doing the things to refill your cup, that's when we run into trouble.
Right. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all levels.
All the ways.
So that newsletter that people can get on is at your website, emergentwomenccoaching.com/chronicle, right?
Yep. And it's a LinkedIn newsletter as well. So I send it out as an email to those who are not on LinkedIn, but you can find it on LinkedIn too.
So Chronicle is the newsletter. And then the website, or the podcast again, is called
The Selfless Syndrome Show.
Selfless Syndrome Show. And do they find that on Apple Podcast, or where do they find that?
It's everywhere. It's whatever your favorite platform is.
Awesome. So, love that. Yeah. And is that conversations in general about women and topics, or is it specifically just medical? What is?
No, there's lots of topics. So I alternate each week. I have an interview and then a solo show every other week. And there's really great conversations on that. There's over 200 episodes. So if anyone wants to engage and has a specific thing you're looking for, just shoot me an email and I'll help guide you.
Awesome. So. Well, and I really appreciate your passion. It's fascinating because you are an introvert, so you're kind of low key, and yet there is this burning passion within you that has you be so multi-talented and so kind of cohesive in terms of all of the different pieces that come together to create a more holistic approach, a more pervasive perspective. And I think that that's one of the things that's really shifting in what women are bringing to business, to medicine.
Yeah.
Pervasive perspective or holistic perspective. So thank you for being overly educated in so many because it means that you're bringing that wealth of knowledge to women for a whole different conversation about we don't have to settle for overwhelmed, exhausted, and resigned. And not only don't we have to, it's not natural, it's not necessary, it's not normal. And there's help for that. So thank you for being the kind of person who helps people with that, because we need more women who are not resigned, who are back in the game and who are enjoying life and having fun. So what's one last thing you'd like to leave everyone with?
The big thing is, you mentioned hope, is not to give up on hope. It is possible to heal, to feel good again, to have that, there's this elusive thing called balance that half the world says doesn't exist. And I believe it does. It's always shifting. And it's really, it's about creating what we need and not what the world says we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Dr. Alex Swindley. Nope, sorry.
Swenson-ridley. It's a mouthful.
Word there. So go and check her out. Go and find Alex and have a conversation with her about, the selfless syndrome and how do we heal, recover, come back from that. reclaim who we are so we can be who we're meant to be in the world. Thank you. And please do come back. I would love to talk more and dive deeper. I know this is such an important conversation for women to have. It's time for us to get over, resign from being resigned.
Yes,
Thank you so
I
much
love
for being here.
that.
A wonderful rest of your day, everybody, and a bodacious week. And please do check out her podcast, her newsletter, and connect with Alex. She's a wonderful resource for you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.